Gloucestershire Charities. The COVID restrictions have meant that their usual fundraising events haven't been able to take place. Some have tried virtual versions, but it's been nowhere near as big an event as they've been hoping in previous years. But now that the final restrictions have been eased today, are things going to change? Let's have a chat to Talitha Nelson from the Gloucestershire Foundation, who joins us on the programme this afternoon. Hi, Talitha.
Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you ever so much for joining us. Tell us a bit about the Gloucestershire Foundation. What do you do?
So, we're a community foundation. So it's the Gloucestershire Community Foundation, which we shortened to GCF because it's a bit of a mouthful. But essentially, we've been going over 30 years in the county, and we're a funder, but we're also a money raiser. But our money is raised through philanthropy and generous donations, which go into grant making. So we do have an element of fundraising. And certainly work with lots of organisations that do. And it's quite interesting to see how that picture's changed and yes, the conversation today about what does the future look like.
So basically, over the last 18 months then, I'm expecting of you to have been extremely busy with lots of charities contacting you asking for help.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about what we were doing pre-pandemic, which was about £300,000 a year, donated to about 100 charities, our work increased fourfold. So we delivered 1.2 million to around 300 charities. So a very, very busy year for us. But what was brilliant is the support that came through. So having gone from 300,000 to 1.2 million, that money's come through from generous donations, organisations, and we couldn't have delivered that without the generous donations of people, which is what we're talking about today.
So do you think things will be easier from today or not?
It's interesting talking to different organisations and then looking at the local picture versus the national picture. So I think locally I'm starting to be invited and there's starting to be promotion around local events. I think where maybe a local event can be done at low cost, and if there was any chance of a cancellation, it doesn't cost that charity too much money, because that's really what it's about. To put on events takes a huge amount of planning and resource, and then for them to cancel, a huge amount of lost income. And I think that's the nervousness of anyone, whether you're a charity fundraiser or in the hospitality industry around events. I think what's great is we're starting to see some local events coming back. So I got invited to an event on the 10th of July, which was the Freemasons event at Hynham Court, and they had to cancel that and book it for the 14th of August. So that's still coming up, and it's an outdoor event, which seems to be much more attractive to people, thinking if I was to commit to an event, if it's outdoors, then I'm safer. So that's going ahead, which is brilliant to see. But again, a huge amount of planning goes into that, and you do need to buy the tickets, and we really need to support them. And if everybody feels safe, it's a great event to do. But then there's still the virtual events. So little charities locally are doing virtual events, and some of them have been great. There's another one that's come up with Gloucestershire Young Carers, and they've done a fabulous online balloon event. And if you go onto their website, it's a really fun thing to do, and you can track it virtually. But like you say, maybe, I don't know, we'll have to see if they feel they're generating as much income from something physical. Then on the national pitch, I think what's really interesting, if you look at the London Marathon, which is a huge amount of planning, long time ahead, massive amounts of spend, they're still going ahead with the London Marathon, but they're doing limited places in London, but then remote runs all over the country. So there's been these hybrid events that are starting to come through, and I think that's how they're spreading their risk, and that's quite interesting, and whether that will stay.
And this is it, isn't it? We've had to get creative in everything we do over the last year and a half or so, but it's interesting now to see how much of that actually becomes, normal life. And I guess that'll be the same with fundraising.
Absolutely. I mean, it has been amazing how creative organisations have become. But the thing is, I think what we've got to remember is these charities are filling gaps where there's no provision, or where statutory provision isn't able to support. So without our charities, so many people would be suffering. Certainly in our county, we've got 5,000 charities, probably around 3,000 registered. If you imagine all of their work suddenly stopped, how many people would be really suffering? So when you get something like a pandemic, a lot of their services had to change. A lot became virtual or weren't contactable. Now from today, they can actually go back to their normal services, if you like, group services, drop-in services. Now, once they start resuming these services, they're more costly, and actually they need funding for those services. So it's a catch-22. They're starting to get back to normal services, but then they haven't been doing necessarily the fundraising around them. So we're going to have to be able to support them somehow, and hopefully they can get back to sort of, I guess, the traditional bucket shaking events. And then it's really down to generous people and donors and people supporting individually if they do, a campaign or raising awareness for their work.
And there is a feeling of not quite knowing what's around the corner. I mean, we're coming out of recent restrictions now, but there is a feeling that, perhaps autumn time, winter time, when it gets to that flu period, we might see things coming back in. Is there a feeling, do you think, of charities thinking, right, we've got a few months now, we've got to make this count, we've got to try and get as much money as possible? Is that on, do you think, or not?
I think so. I think we're all nervous. I think in the back of our minds, let's face reality. Nobody knows the future. We're expecting politicians to make decisions about whether we do go into lockdown, whether we don't go into lockdown, and with the complete unknown of not knowing how this pandemic's going to continue. So the science has to keep following, and they're having to keep making those decisions. So we don't know with, I guess, the loosening of everything, how that's going to go. So I think we're all probably nervous that if the science then comes through to say, oh, it's actually got back to levels we really can't continue like this, maybe there would be another lockdown. So, I possibly wouldn't be surprised maybe if winter became a more restrictive time for us all. So I think, yes, definitely. I think the summer, we're having to make the most of making hay while the sun shines, as they say.
And I guess for the larger charities, they've got enough members, they've got enough feelers out there and enough experience, you think, to try and ride this out. What advice would you give to people who are part of smaller charities in Gloucestershire listening at the moment?
Over the pandemic, it was really important to try and stay visible. And I know it's not possible for everybody, and maybe you need to get a bit of help, but online is so crucial to keep your visibility. Getting onto Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, it's really important to try and use some of those tools that are free to use, and maybe it's the skill set missing. Not everybody uses these forums, but for us as a community foundation where we're all working from home and we had a job to do, online was absolutely vital to get the awareness out there. So whatever happens, it's just adapting, and those organisations that pivoted really quickly, adapted really quickly, and just went with whatever tools were available were the ones that were able to keep fundraising and keeping their awareness. So in terms of marketing, it's just keeping your organisation in front of people. So whatever happens, maybe where there's a bit of a lull at the moment, and maybe we're not so restricted, try and use some of your resources or get your networking to try and maybe find someone's son or daughter or young person to come and help you and set these things up for winter. So start thinking ahead and planning ahead that if we are slightly more restricted over the winter period, try and get some of your social media up to date.
Great advice, Talitha. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme.
Absolute pleasure.
Good luck with the summer.
Thanks so much. You too. Take care.
Thanks so much. Talitha Nelson.